Thank you, Aaron, and good morning, everyone. For those of you who are new to Shining Mountain, welcome to Waldorf Education. And those of you who I see who are familiar faces, welcome back. Usually at this time on a morning, I'm teaching the 12th grade at this moment, and someone else is covering for me today, but teaching the 12th grade is really one of the special pleasures of being a Waldorf teacher. I came here in 2004, but this is actually my 30th year of being a Waldorf teacher, and I've had the chance to teach first graders and 12th graders and all the grades in between along the way, and it really gives you a deeper appreciation of what's happening here as you see how the curriculum is designed to meet every age. And so today, my goal is to say a little bit about the history of Waldorf education. I don't think you can really understand it without understanding the context that it came out of, but also about the mission of Waldorf education, and especially to focus in on how a Waldorf school is fundamentally different from another kind of school. The way Rudolf Steiner interpreted education, the word education, and the meaning of what an education should be is completely different than what I had when I went to a public school, and I'm guessing probably for most of you too. So later, at the end of this, I'll actually share something with you that comes at the end of our 12th grade year, which is a tradition that began actually with Rudolf Steiner and the first graduates of a Waldorf school. And it's become part of our practice, and it's a way of connecting what we do now in schools that have changed so much in the last 90 years with what the original initiative was about and the initial ideas from Rudolf Steiner. So in order to begin, we have to think about the fact that the first Waldorf school, which are now all over the world, was in 1919 in the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory. Many people don't know that where does Waldorf come from, or that word, and it really does not have any deeper meaning than the fact that the first Waldorf school took place in the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory in Stuttgart, Germany. And that's where Waldorf comes from, and it has stayed with it all over the world ever since. But more than the place, the time is really an important part of the story. 1919 was just a couple of years after World War I was wrapping up. And we have to try to imagine being in Europe when that event was still living and visible in everyone's lives. The past 100 years before that had been the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the steam engine, all kinds of progress in different directions. And now, all of a sudden, we're using all of these advances to slaughter each other. And people actually wondered, what does the future for mankind hold? It wasn't hard to imagine that things might not last much longer. And as we know, they got worse before they got better, especially in Europe. So when Rudolf Steiner was asked by Emil Molt, who was the owner of the cigarette factory, to start a school for the children of the workers there, he knew he was speaking to someone who had very definite ideas about education. Steiner started speaking publicly about education in 1906, and he voiced a very common theme. One that said that really, unless education changes, we shouldn't expect society to change. Seems like a pretty common thought to us today, but really nothing outside of Waldorf education has changed much in terms of what education was seen to be then and how it's seen to be today. But he said that really, unless education begins with an accurate picture of what a human being is, we can't expect it to do very much other than training of various kinds. Because really there were two streams leading into that time. One was the one of technology, and with this came the view that human beings are really just kind of different kinds of machines. Really, and you hear this expression all the time today, that we're really just a machine. And we're run by our computer up here. And this vision of a human being as being something of an inanimate object. The other stream came from Darwin. And Darwin, again, tremendously important scientist, fundamental truths involved with his work. Yet one of the results that came from Darwin's view was human beings are just animals. And we exist in a world of competition, and those who are the fittest survive. And that ethic had worked its way into society, so that really the strongest would survive. And the strongest in World War I meant those who had more weapons, more people that could be mowed down in battle. And it was a picture that didn't offer much hope for the future between the animal and the machine and the combinations of those two. So Steiner said, first of all, we have to begin with an accurate picture of what a human being is. And a human being is not just a physical body. And here's the place where Waldorf education begins to separate from more traditional kinds of education. Because Steiner laid out a very detailed picture of what a human being is and how we develop in the world. And just from that, we've already had, that statement carries the beginning of what a Waldorf school is. It's based on the idea that a human being is a complex being, actually a fourfold being in its most basic form, the way Steiner would describe it, and that we all have a particular path in life in front of us. It's not something to be imprinted on us. It's not job training. It's not socialization training. It's not citizenship training to make you a good, quiet citizen that doesn't rock the boat at all. But rather, you come into the world with a destiny, and education should be designed to help you discover your path. That's very different. That's very different. As a teacher, when I think of how my teachers looked at me and what their goals were in relation to me, none of them were thinking this person has a unique destiny and it's my task to help this person uncover it. I mean, there you have a very different point of view about what should happen in a school. So I want to describe, and this is fairly unusual for an introductory lecture, but I'm going to go a little further than usual in it and describe what the fourfold human being is, because I think really, without understanding that, you might never get how different what this is how it's different from other paths. But with it, you can see that the curriculum follows this concept. And without it, how limited a picture it is. So I'm going to try something new. I found this out in the, I haven't used one of these whiteboards before, but let's see how it works. See if you can read my writing. What I do with the 12th graders most days is we begin by saying, when I hand back papers, what does this say? And then sometimes I don't know. I have to kind of piece it together. But anyway, the ideas that I'm about to explain are different in the sense that Rudolf Steiner gave the foundations of these aspects of the human being. We all see the results of them. And the first one is the notion that human beings in connection with the mineral kingdom have a physical body. We are obviously different than rocks because we have more than just a physical body. So that part is not too hard to understand, but then we get to what Rudolf Steiner in other places referred to as the life body. And in connection with the world of plants, we have a life body. We have a body of formative forces is another way he describes it, which takes the physical elements that we are made up of, and we will return to at some point, but forms them into a living thing. And so he said that the life body doesn't actually appear in its full, free form until about the change of teeth, around 7. And he said when the physical body is fully articulated during those first 7 years, then the ether body is ready for another task that it is involved in. Beyond forming the physical body, it also becomes the foundation of memory. So here we have an important addition that comes around the age of 7. Doesn't mean that children can't remember things before that, but their memory is different from the time of 7 on. It can actually, as Steiner said, be worked with and developed at that point, and shouldn't really be messed with much before that. Because when you go into this realm and you start using capacities that are meant to come later, you're actually stealing forces from the physical body. And Steiner described in an uncanny way our modern medical situation in the world when he said, if education continues as it does, around the age of 40 or 50, there's going to be widespread outbreaks of diabetes. He said that in 1910. And what are we seeing today? Well, you wouldn't think it had something to do with education. And it's not a matter of being taught to eat the right foods. It's much deeper than that. It's something that actually was lost when it should have been gained back here in this period. So, in connection with the plants, we have the life body. And then we see in relation to the animal kingdom, we also share consciousness. Now, Steiner also gave the terms ether body or etheric body for the life body, or the astral body for consciousness. But in connection with animals, we can look, if you look at a tree and look at an animal, and this is a great source of meditation even, what's the difference? What capacities are in the one that do not exist in the other? You start to get an impression of what an astral body is, this body of consciousness, mobility, that allows us to be now responsive to the world around us in a way that a plant cannot, as far as we can currently measure. And he said the consciousness body in a human being appears at puberty. It's not that we weren't conscious until that time, but at that stage, that body is freed from its tasks in building the body, and now it's ready to be part of the thinking apparatus of a human being. That before that time, children kind of live in the shadow of thinking. They mostly think what people around them think. They're not really penetrating the world, and that's perfectly normal that they should be that way. But around the age of puberty, we can see again, it follows a physical change. When the astral body comes in, children are different. You watch 4th and 5th graders run outside, it's not always easy to tell whether it's a boy or a girl in 4th or 5th grade. They kind of float. They don't even seem to have bones inside of them. But 7th and 8th graders, they don't float anymore. The bones are visible. The muscles are having a new relationship with those bones. And now, instead of the younger child, now we have the... It's a whole new... It begins with a physical change, but it becomes a soul change. We see something different that's there that just wasn't there before in the same way. And Steiner described how once that physical body gets weight, and he describes German students in 1910, 1920 in a way that we might describe adolescents today, when he describes this change of the lengthening of the arms and the kind of loping gait that starts to develop. He said they feel that weight, and that weight awakens them to the principles of mechanics that are not only present in the world around them, but in their own bodies. And now is the time for logic. Now is the time there's a whole new capacity of thinking that comes around the age of 12 to 14. Our curriculum changes around 6th grade to begin to meet that change, and then continues on into high school. And then finally, Steiner describes a capacity which he says is completely unique to human beings. And this is the ego. This is not Freud's ego. This is the simplest way to define it would be to call it individuality. When you look at a field of golden retrievers running around together, it's not easy, without being the owner of one of them, to say that they are fundamentally different from each other. They have what Steiner would call a group ego, or a group soul that they live in. And that's the limit of animal life. Their goal is not to become individuals that are different from all other golden retrievers. Even though there are characteristic differences of your pet, and people will swear, my golden retriever is different. The reality is they're not different in the same way that you and I are different from each other. You have a destiny that is different from mine. And so with this ego, this is around 21. And it's often people can reflect back on your own life. What happened around the age of 21 for you? Were there particular things that you can look back on and say, at that point, and sometimes it's an event that comes to you from the outside that just changes everything for you, but often it's just a kind of state of being in which you feel differently in relation to the people around you than you did before. I remember when I was a 16, 17-year-old teenager in school, I didn't exist if I wasn't with my boys. I grew up with about 4 or 5 friends. We were together from the time we were 7 all the way through high school. We played football together, baseball. We did everything together every day. And all of a sudden, when I was around 21, I started to realize, I don't think I'm going to go see them tonight. And I was whole without them in a way that I hadn't been before. And here we see the transition from the group soul to the individual ego. So this is the picture of the human being that Rudolf Steiner put forward when he was talking to the first teachers of the Waldorf school back then, and said, we have to base an education on a real picture of what a human being is. If you start here and you end here, you're going to end up with World War II. If you can have things like this that enter into the education and the plan for education, we can start to change the world. And for a guy that was about to start a school that didn't exist yet, that now has tens of thousands of students all over the world, there are now over 100 Waldorf schools in China. I mean, it's becoming exploding over there, and they're in pretty much every culture in the world. He's right. It has happened. That the Waldorf schools, and even the fact that Waldorf schools are affecting public schools now. Public schools, many public schools are designed, charter schools, to imitate the Waldorf method. It's called a Waldorf-inspired school because it really can't be a full Waldorf school if it's not an independent school. Once the state gives you money, they want things in return, and you are no longer a free school to create your own curriculum. But it shows it's important enough that they have decided, we see the values of this, and we'd like to have our own. Is question?
I'm just curious how Waldorf got into China with the anthroposophic underpinnings.
Well, that's a whole other story. That would be a good question. Oh, the question is, how did Waldorf education and the background of anthroposophy, make its way into China? And the answer to it is it hasn't officially made it into China. China, as I've heard described to me by people who have been involved in this, they have the green light, the yellow light, and the red light for initiatives that are not fully sanctioned by the Communist Party. And Waldorf education now has the yellow light, which means you can continue to grow until we see problems with what this is. And I mean, there's one school in one city that has 8 kindergartens in its Waldorf school. I mean, it's a massive school. High schools have not really taken hold yet, and now Chinese students are coming here to go to high school. We have a Chinese student in our high school now, and probably another one for next year, and some of them, a lot of Waldorf schools now have 5, 6 Chinese students attending. So, anyway, now I want to go through how does this then translate into a curriculum for a school. And first of all, we have this period of 1 through 7, which we think of as pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. And in that period of time, children have a particular style of learning. And their particular style of learning is imitation. Steiner describes how a young child is so devoted to the world around him. It begins in trust. It begins with love for the people who provide all that child's needs every day. That as the child begins to stand up and speak, that trust extends out to the world around them. And how do they express this love? By imitating. I love this so much, I'm going to do it myself. There's no thought process. It's just an immediate connection. So in the kindergarten years, children, the environment is very, very important. You walk into the Waldorf kindergarten and there is nothing there that is not supposed to be there. We hope. Maybe the broom gets left out in a place from the night before or something, but really everything is very consciously chosen and prepared to be there. So the children can see people using those things and imitate them. And the image Steiner gave for the kindergarten teachers was the priestesses. He said these should be the oldest teachers in the school, should be with the youngest children. They are the ones that have transformed their bodies to the fullest extent, these bodies, to the point that they can be emulated by young children. Their thoughts, their feelings can live into the atmosphere around them in a way that is safe for children. So in this period of time, when they're building their physical bodies, obviously they're meant to play. Their play is serious. It's been said by many observers, play is the work of the child. You know, they take it to the way that later we look at our work in the world. We forget the play part sometimes. But 1 through 7, it's really just meant to be a time of play and discovering of the world, articulation of the physical senses, and building that relationship with the world around you through trust. Trust is very, very important. If the trust isn't there, you have the beginning of learning problems. That's not the only source of it, but that can be a pretty serious source of it. When that feeling of, wait a minute, you know, where am you thrown back into oneself, then it stops this natural flow relationship with the environment. And of course, you know, people should not be sitting, oh, what happened to my 4-year-old the other day? I know this is going to affect his whole life. No, it's not like that. You know, things happen. This is a world in which, you know, unpredictable things are happening all the time. But the point is, the gesture, the mood, the general climate of the child's life is one of love and trust. So around 7 years old, the second teeth come. According to Rudolf Steiner, that's the signal a stage is done. The next stage has begun. Now this changes. Some children 6, some 8. Some of them are ready when their teeth maybe haven't fully changed yet in ways. Those things, it's not like right on the moment. But at the age of 7, we now go to, and what I'm going to shift from age to grades 1 through 5. Because I would say that in the whole of Waldorf education, even given that the whole, that based on a view of the human being like this is already completely different, the key difference between what we do happens and other schools happens in these grades right here. And it has to do with this very view of what a human being is. Because traditional education eliminates this and immediately goes to the consciousness body, the astral body, and teaching to the intellect in first grade. You have expectations. Children are now being taught to read in kindergarten. They get to first grade, and it's time that if you don't have these capacities, there must be something wrong with you. We separate you from other people because we're testing to make sure that, you know, you're developing in the way you're supposed to. This is a crime. This is a tragedy because it's ignoring what a human being really is. And yet, it's so customary. We think because everyone's doing it, it must be a good thing. And yet, every year, people walk around going, why are schools so messed up? Well, no one thinks about changing them in a fundamental way. It's, oh, we can't do that because we don't even know what he's talking about when he says things like this. Well, it's not so hard to imagine into it. When I became a Waldorf teacher, I cannot say that I saw a human being and could fully articulate life body, consciousness body, our ego, but I saw the results of them in ways that were described through the courses that Steiner gave with the teachers, and over 30 years, I've never seen anything to contradict the way he described it. He was seeing something real, and it's become the basis of a very successful system of education. So instead of the usual testing and measuring and separating out that leads to a lot of pain in young people's lives, once you're told that you're not the same as other people, or you can't be with your friends during this time because we have to teach you special things, that's something that doesn't go away simply. I often tell a story of a boy who was in my first class that I taught, the only class I taught 1 through 8. I did long relief for several classes where I came in 4th grade or 5th grade. But there was a boy his father was an engineer who'd gone to Princeton, and his mother had gone to Douglas College in New Jersey, where I grew up, and Danny was not reading when other children were reading. 3rd grade passed by, Danny's still like the cat saw the dog. And so they're saying, what's going on? And the whole time, it's not like we're not teaching these things. We begin teaching them in 1st grade. We are teaching reading in 1st grade. But whether or not you take it on in the identical way to the person next to you is not important to us. In fact, it may be a wonderful sign that you're not getting that as quickly as the person next to you. So Danny, I kept saying to them, it'll be fine. And of course, the whole time I'm going to my colleagues, will it be fine? And, and they're going, yes, it will be fine. And we actually have all these different ways of measuring, and through something that's weakly understood, eurythmy and form drawing, these are actually very clear indicators to us of what is going on in a person's consciousness. And so they said, don't worry. So all of a sudden in 4th grade, I'll never forget this. I actually can remember the moment where Danny decided, Danny was involved with playing. He was out with the boys every day. They were building forts and stuff. And all of a sudden, Danny looked around one day and realized, whoa, everybody's reading but me. And all of a sudden, this arsenal of tools that had been built into his body through repetition and rhythm and memory, all the skills were there. He just didn't want them yet. Within 3 weeks, Danny was reading at the same level as anybody else. And I was interested to watch when he went to high school, when Danny took standardized tests, would there be signs that Danny was deficient in one of these ways? Well, Danny wasn't deficient at all. He was in the 90-plus percentile in math, which we knew would happen, but he was also 90-plus percentile in the verbal scores of the SAT. He had over 600 as his score. And so it had nothing to do with his capacities. Just a little anecdote. Danny went on to Rochester Institute of Technology and graduated from there. He graduated in the same year that 9/11 happened. And Danny decided when he was graduating from college that he didn't want to pursue a career as an engineer anymore. He was going to join the New York City Police Department. And he's now a captain in the New York City Police Department, which gives me hope for the future of New York City and the world, actually. But anyway, in these years, instead of the traditional forms, what do we do? What do we place at the center of the education? And it's art. Art is perfectly designed for the way a child learns at that time. They take in what they can, they take in what they need, they're exposed to a wide variety of experiences, and it's way beyond the I tell you things, you tell me back things mode that most education is based on. Art is way bigger than that. And Steiner was saying this 90 years ago when no one was saying it. Even 20 years ago, no one was saying it. All of a sudden, people were, oh my gosh, the Mozart effect. Music actually has an educational value and now let's change everything until the budget gets tight. A Waldorf school would close if there was no music in the school. There would be no point to having the school without deeply based in art. And when Steiner was after several years of the Waldorf school being in existence, people said to him, well, now you have this successful school, there are others starting. Would you do anything different now? And he said, yes, there would be more art if I was starting it again now. And so the key to art also is the way it happens, that it flows in just perfectly with the rhythmical nature with which a child learns at this time. Steiner said if you tell somebody something once, you're wasting your time. To a young child means nothing. You tell them that in a different way every day, for weeks, for months, for years, it's part of who they are at that point. It becomes a capacity for life. Very different, very different. You know, you go through this block with your textbook in second grade, you're not going to see that again for a long time after the test is over. I had one of my friends in New York who used to teach with me, said, we basically test information out of students. Once we give them the test, it's gone. There's no need for this ever again. And yet, what's the new answer to education? More testing. Let's do more testing. Now, there is value to some of that, because I realize not every school has the same resources available that we have here, or a Waldorf school has, or even a lot of wealthy public schools. So there's some mission for measuring student performance, but there are a lot of more creative ways that could happen than just sit down and take something that your neighbors are testing. So anyway, the other picture of the grades 1 through 5 that makes it completely different is Steiner said it was very important that the teachers stay with the students at this age. Now, think about that for a moment. We have here from 1 through 7, trust is the key to learning. The trust in the environment allows you to imitate, allows you to say, let's do it again, let's do it again. The repetition that becomes the basis of learning. And then you get to first grade, you build trust in a person, finally, maybe, hopefully. And then second grade, new teacher, somebody else in there to try to develop a relationship. This is not conducive to learning. To have someone that you can grow into, that you understand the way they speak, you understand the messages in their voice that come without them even knowing it, but you begin to trust that this person is my guide into the world. I want to know this because my teacher wants me to know these things. There you have another very important key to how a Waldorf school is different and how it honors this picture of what a person is rather than what we want them to be. So grades 1 through 5 is a trying time for parents because, you know, you take your child to the grandparents' house and he's not reading yet, and it's like, you pay for this? You know, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? And so, you know, it's just a period involves tremendous trust. I remember the most recent class I taught in the lower school here, one of the parents said one night in a meeting, my brother told me when I put my daughter in the Waldorf school, don't ask any questions until 6th grade. Just until then, trust that what they're doing is right and it makes sense. Now, that's not easy. We wouldn't ask people to sign on the contract, you know, no questions until 6th grade. But there will come times where you say, what is going on here? He doesn't know anything. And the teacher is sending reports home, he's wonderful. He's everything we want a child to be. And I can tell you, it wasn't until I became a high school teacher that I could fully appreciate this. Because the same students that I looked at in 4th and 5th grade had said, oh my God, what will happen to this person? In high school, you'd never know that happened. Because he's been taught according to who he really is and the natural rhythms of learning. After 5th grade, now we get to the final stage, and now we're again speaking of grades 6 through 12. See how I'm doing on time here. Oh, pretty good. And in grades 6 through 12, now the astral body is part of the being. You look at an 8th grader, a 9th grader, and again, you look at a 4th grader. If you don't see that those are two completely different beings, you're not looking very hard. Actually, his point was, at the time that puberty arrives, the student, the young person, the individual now begins to feel the full force of his destiny in the world. He is literally a different person than he was 2 or 3 years earlier. This is not unusual to see as a high school teacher, to see someone and you think, wow, you don't bear any relationship to who you were before. And this is a great hope to parents, you know, because you can say he could be completely different than he is now. And there's rational thinking in that. You know, you see your child and it seems to them they're not going anywhere, not moving in any way, they're not changing. But a whole flood of new capacities comes into their being at this time, and they are all of a sudden thinking, asking questions, looking askance at things, doubting things. All of this comes into now forming who they will become as an adult. You get the first glimmers. Actually, you do get a wonderful glimmer at the age of 9. The 9-year change is a time where you get this little glimpse of the future. I often used to think of it as a swing, the swing of life. You're swinging back and forth, and you swing away from the next stage, and you're toward it again. 9 years old, children often have this moving forward, and you get this glimpse of the future. I remember a girl in the first, 3rd grade I taught came to me one time at recess. She would walk around at recess and just have this look of wide-eyed wonder. And her name was Sophie D'Angelo, and she was English. She had this wonderful little accent. She was so adorable. And she came up to me one day, and when she was 9, and she said, "Mr. Blair, how do my eyes see?" And thank goodness I was smart enough at that point to admit that I had no idea how the eyes see. You know, I didn't get down to talking about, you know, the iris and the pupil and all this stuff. I just said, "Sophie, that's a great question." I mean, and I was kind of living into her world of wonder, getting to the place of, yeah, how does this become the window to the world? You know, it's a miracle. I mean, we can talk about the scientific view of it, but still, you're looking at me. What's going on there? So, wonderful question. But at 6th grade, all of a sudden, logic becomes a real faculty within the human being. And now we begin training that. The 6th grade curriculum is filled with science, physics. You're experiencing sound, vision, all these different aspects. And the key is, at a time when adolescence kicks in big, which can often mean the turning in, we're also looking at ourselves at that time in a different way. And it's very easy, and the world almost encourages it now, that the children turn in on themselves and experience a kind of inner soul pain that is the beginning of the path to individuality, realizing I'm not you, I'm not part of you. So the curriculum is saying, no, but look out here. Look how wonderful things are. Attend to this. Try to figure this out. And it's not ignore yourself, but don't get lost in yourself at a time that you have no capacity to really take in what's going on inside of you. And that curriculum continues on through the high school, changing a little bit each year to the point where 12th graders, every year in the high school, we have a different question that comes with the year. And in 12th grade, it's the question of who. Who am I? Who are you? And they're ready to cross this bridge now into the outer world. And we're encouraging it. We're not holding on to them saying, oh, this little Waldorf bubble that you're in is about to end. Please don't leave here. No, they're ready to go, and we are ready for them to go, but in a very loving way. So I'm going to wrap up this part of it by just pointing to a couple of other things, and there are a couple of little quotes I'd like to give you, and then we could have some questions. And that is another aspect of what makes a Waldorf school completely different. While Rudolf Steiner was describing the human being and describing what kind of devotion it would take to be a great teacher, or to be a teacher at all, he really was pointing to the fact that you have to see this as a mission if you're a teacher. This isn't a job. This is something that you're going to be asked to do a lot of things that you don't want to do in terms of the rest of your life, but you have to be committed to it. And he said one of the things that you must do if you want to help a child to develop in a healthy way is, as a teacher, you do your work during the day, but then you're also doing work at night with those students too. And Steiner described how with the class teachers, when they have a class, that every night before they go to sleep, they let the being of every child in their class pass before their inner eye. And it's an amazing process, as someone who practiced it for many years and still practice it, but in a different way in the high school, how it's almost as if the being of a certain child would speak to you in those moments and tell you of something that you didn't know was going on. Now, I don't mean necessarily a conversation, but in some ways it wasn't much different than that, where a thought would come to me, this person needs this, or this is about to happen with this child. This adds an immeasurable amount of value to a Waldorf education because the teachers know the students in ways that not many other people do and will ever know them, frankly, the way a teacher might. And it comes from this daily rhythmical communication with the child's higher being. Child's angel is the way Steiner described it quite clearly. There is a higher being that is helping this child through the world, and you can become part of that process with that angel, and it's real. I mean, this is not something Steiner just made up and threw to us. You know, thousands of Waldorf teachers all over the world practice this and speak about it in great detail about what they're doing. And so there again, when you're going through this period of grades 1 through 5 and wondering, oh my gosh, what are we doing? What's the tuition this year? You can realize that beyond, if you just compare it visually to what's happening in another school, you can say, why are we paying for this? Or why are we paying for this one instead of that one? Well, it's important to realize what is beneath the surface of the school is completely different. There is no other school around here, I mean, other Waldorf schools, but there's no other school that's doing this every day for your child. And people look at our 12th graders and say, wow, every year there's such interesting people, and they're all so different from each other. What's different about them? They've been taught by people who understand this, and they've been guided by people who love them enough to carry them into their sleep life at night, and to do it for years. That's something that you can't pay for. You know, there's no price you can put on that. And so I'd like to just, in mentioning that to you, many people, it's amazing, parents are part of schools for many, many years, Waldorf schools, and never know that that goes on, that the teachers do that. We don't talk about it. We're not bragging about it. You know, oh my gosh, I took an hour and a half last night. Your son was driving me crazy when I was trying to go to sleep. I keep saying sons. The girls can drive you crazy too, even more. I mean, there's no, I don't know what my particular destiny has been, but I've always had classes in which there are 2 or 3 times as many girls as boys in the class. My first class, I had graduating 8th grade, I had 36 students in the class, and 27 of them were girls. 7th grade with 27 girls that you've had for many, many years is like an experience. I could write a book about that year just alone. And I just went to a reunion with them actually in New York. And it was one of the most wonderful, one of the most moving things. I don't have biological children of my own, but I felt like I was in a room with about 25 students who were all my own children. And especially, I mean, I wouldn't even say it was more the girls than the boys. They just looked at me like I was their father. And in many ways, I was like their father. Some of them did not have a father. Some of them, you know, families split up. And yet through that, Waldorf education becomes even more important in a world where things are constantly changing. To have that kind of stability, they were just getting to that stage of their lives where they kind of knew intellectually I've done something different, but they wanted to meet with me in the afternoon before we had this big reunion at night, and they wanted me to say, what were you doing? You know, what's the secret? And they basically said, why am I different than everyone else that I know? And we like it, you know, we see that we're different. They're, you know, in their early 30s, but they're realizing that qualitatively their experience of the world around them is different than others. That's a tremendous gift to give to young people, to say your experience of life will be different than other people's. And I tried to talk to them. We actually do that now in 12th grade here. We start telling them, you know, with the ideas, the philosophy. What I'm telling you this morning, I've already started to do with the 12th grade. And we have a class in the spring of 12th grade, a whole course called Senior Seminar, where we go through all of this. And I actually introduce them to the ideas behind Waldorf education. And not, you know, you have to believe this or anything, but they they're very open to it because they know they're doing something that's quite different. And for a long time, this has been a burden to them. Why can't we be more like other kids? Why can't we watch TV and do all that stuff? And all of a sudden, when they get to high school, it's more like, I hear again and again the seniors saying, I am so grateful I went to this school. I actually told my parents the other day, I am glad that they did this to me. Before they graduated. I have to tell you this little anecdote. It's another funny story. That a friend of mine teaches in Michael Hall in England, and it's the oldest English-speaking Waldorf school. And Mrs. Ogletree and I went to visit. He and his wife and his sons are good friends of mine, and we've visited each other's classes. And we were staying at his house in Forest Row, England. And he has his little computer room. Waldorf teachers are so funny. He had a room that's separate from the rest of his house with a little laptop and a desk, and he didn't want the vibrations of his computer coming into the house. So he had this little pantry with nothing in it but a computer, but a big picture, a big page of a newspaper right above it. And it's a picture of a concert, a description of a concert by Alison, what is her name? The country star, Alison Krauss, right? It's a concert. And I said, Stephen, why do you have this one thing on the wall? He said, I was at that concert and Alison Krauss is my friend. And I said, really? And he said, yes, I go to the Nashville Waldorf School every year. I spend the spring there, and she's my friend. She invited me to her concert with Robert Plant, lead singer of Led Zeppelin. The story is going to get way more strange in a moment. And so she said, he said she had the concert and she invited me to be her guest. I was sitting in the front with Libby. It was wonderful. We liked the show. And afterwards she said, come back and meet us and I'll introduce you to Robert. So Stephen said he's wandering backstage and it's filled with people. This is Nashville, the who's who of music. The music world is back there. And Stephen doesn't know who any of them are. And Allison, he's feeling like it's time for me to leave. And all of a sudden, from across the room, he hears Allison's voice boom out, Peter, my teacher. And she comes over and gives him a big hug, and she says, let me introduce you to Robert. And Stephen knew who Robert Plant was. They're from England, so he knew where they came from. And he said, and Robert Plant shakes his hand, and the first thing he says to him is, all my children went to Waldorf schools. And Stephen was stunned, to hear this. And he said, in fact, if I didn't take the path I took, I would have been a Waldorf teacher. And he actually said this on NPR. This was an interview around the time of a concert tour he was doing a couple years ago, where he spoke about being a teacher in a private school. And he didn't actually say the name of it, but he told Stephen an additional story, and he said, my last daughter just graduated, and she said to me, why did you send me to a school that would make me so different than everybody else I know? And Robert said, he looked at her and he said, that's exactly why I sent you to that school along with your brothers and sisters, so that you would be different. You would have a different experience of life than I had. One can only imagine the kind of experience he had of life. But anyway, I'd like to just finish with a couple of quotations. And this really goes back to the first Waldorf school, and it gets to my theme of what does love have to do with it. Because underneath all of this is a description of the word love, which is different than the one we usually think of. It's not sentimental love. It's not even the love of a parent for a child. But love, the way Steiner describes it, it's almost an objective experience of another person's individuality. It's the idea that you have a path that is different than my path. And my job as a teacher is to help you to discover that path. That's who I am. That's how he describes love. And it really comes out of an idea of devotion to that person's path, even if you don't like it, even if it doesn't seem to make sense to you. And that brings in a whole other set of challenges, to know what is destiny and what is not. But here's something that Rudolf Steiner said to children in an assembly in November 20th, 1920. And he says, what your teacher, and there are many descriptions of Steiner, Dr. Steiner coming to visit the schools, and he'd have his long black coat on, and he'd walk up there, and we see these pictures of Steiner now, he kind of looks like Frankenstein or something. You think, did this guy ever smile? But the stories are that when he would walk through the playground, the children would come running up to him and hang onto his coat, and he would always say the same thing to them. And here's a little description of how that would go. And he's saying this in an assembly now, and he says, what your teachers say to you comes from incredibly hard work on their part, from the strength of their devotion and from their love for you. But what comes from their love must also be able to get to you, and that is why I always say the same thing to you. Love your teachers, because love will carry what comes from your teachers' hearts into your hearts and into your heads. Interesting order there. Into your heart first. Into your heart first, and then into your heads. Love is the best way for what teachers have to give to flow into their students. That is why I am always going to ask you again today, do you love your teachers? Do you still love them? And then it says in parentheses, the children shout, yes! And then it's followed up by, this is a little article from the research bulletin, which is a great thing. If you ever want to know more about what's going on in the Waldorf world, the research bulletin, David Mitchell, our own friend and former colleague here, is one of the founders of it. And it says, when Rudolf Steiner visited the Waldorf school, he would ask the students, do you love your teachers? And he would sometimes ask them several times. By asking this question, Rudolf Steiner was helping the students and the teachers to recognize that without the love that streams from teacher to student and from student to teacher, no education is possible. That's a pretty extreme point. So when you say, what does love have to do with it? You could almost say, what does love not have to do with it? A school that exists without love and the kind of devotion that comes out of a view of the human being like this, what are they actually accomplishing? What can happen there? And he's saying education in the way that he defines education, which is, can you find your path if the people teaching you don't even believe you have one? And that's a serious question. So the last one I want to bring comes back to my original statement about the 12th graders, or the last thing I want to say, and that is how we end now 12th grade with our students. And this is actually a description from a great book by another author, Peter Selg, who is a doctor, a child psychiatrist, who now he gives talks on Waldorf education on everything. He's got 5 children in the Waldorf school in Dornach. He says, in this book, he describes, he has a little section at the end where one of the original Waldorf students wrote some things later and told the story of how when they were graduating, Rudolf Steiner was there with them and how they admired him so much. There was actually a crisis where one time where they said after like the second or third year of the high school, the students were very unhappy. And they say, we want a meeting with Rudolf Steiner. And you can imagine the teachers like, what? They're going to tell Dr. Steiner on us, who had hired them all individually. And they told him, our teachers are so involved in what they're teaching, they don't see us anymore. They're experts in their fields, but they don't even know who's in front of them. And Steiner was very angry about this. And they say the meeting that he had with the teachers basically was telling them, what do you think you're doing? And reminding them of really, hey, this is what we're doing. We're here because we love these students. And they are here because we love these students. They are destined to be in front of you. So don't blow it, basically, is what he was saying to them. And so this is now at the end of graduation. And this is serious because it shows that Steiner's view of the human being came out of an experience of life which is different than ours. I mean, we've had people throughout history, Pythagoras, Einstein, Emily Dickinson, all these people, they just had a different experience of life, and it enabled them to be people that we remember because of things they accomplished in their lives. Rudolf Steiner is one of those people. There's a great documentary that a guy from the BBC has made of Steiner. It's a two-part, it's a 3-hour documentary of his life that actually Karen has in her office, and if anyone wanted to borrow it and look at it, you should, because it's tremendously inspiring. But anyway, he says, he's saying now to the graduates, the 12th graders, he says, your teachers think day and night about what your future will be like. I can tell you that in 10 or 20 years' time, the situation will be much worse than the terrible years we went through that we are experiencing now. A deep sorrow darkens the soul when one thinks of the great suffering that this future holds for humankind. He's saying this in 1924. The teachers are also sad to dismiss you now from this school, but it will be a source of great strength for them to see you all prove yourselves as true human beings. And that's the end of the quote. And then the man, Rudolf Grosse, says, these were basically his words. Deep in thought, I went home after this assembly, working out again and again in my mind. Now it's the year 1924. In 10 years, it will be 1934. And in 20 years, 1944. I will be between 30 and 40 then, and will have to live through a historical age that will be more terrible than anything I experienced before. So we all know what he was talking about. I mean, Steiner was looking forward to, in 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. And after that came World War II. And one could, without any question, say it was way worse than World War I, as unimaginable as that could be. So, but here are his parting words to the students, and this is so beautiful. I hope I can do this. He's saying to them, they asked to meet with him as they were graduating, and he said, he gave them a leaving verse, which is a ceremony we have now with our 12th graders. We sit with them, they talk about what their lives have been like at this point, their experience of their education, and the second question more looking toward the future. And then they're given the same verse that Steiner gave to the students. And he said to them in this ceremony, you are leaving school now, but we will meet again in half a year. This didn't happen because Rudolf Steiner actually was dead by then. Each of you can then report how you got on during this time. The memory of your school will accompany you into the life that lies ahead of you. And if in later life you come to a point where you are at a loss, at your wits' end and alone, pondering and searching for help, the spirit of the school will stand behind you, put a hand on your shoulder, and bestow advice and comfort to you. You have asked for a verse, and I've written it down here. And I'm just going to read that verse, and then we can move on. So this is the verse that we, again, give to the students now. And it's a translation from German. May those things shine again on the path of life that in the time of youth were planted in the heart as the seal of true humanity. May those things be strong in the depth of memory which the soul discovered through the heart under the spirit guidance of the powers that teach for life. Back to the modern world. So anyway, my point today was just to talk about, what is a Waldorf school? How is it different than other schools? And something, hopefully, to give you heart in the many times that will come when you will wonder, is this the right place for my child? Hopefully your questions will be met by teachers who take you seriously and have the sense of pride that I have about what we're doing here. And lastly, just to say thank you for getting this far. Because just being in this room now, I presume for most of you as parents, shows that you are someone who is willing to step out of the ordinary path, and to want something different for your children. And this is a gift not only to your children, but it's a gift to everyone that they will meet in their whole lives. I mean, I've been seeing students graduate now for 30 years, and I see some of them now, and they are remarkable people. And every one of them is surrounded by people and a life that they are meant to have. And that's something that not everyone can feel inside of them. They can think it as a thought, but with Steiner, the idea is what you haven't first experienced in your heart, you will never understand in your head. So he designed a curriculum that was meant to do that. And so, thank you for listening to that. That was a long... We actually have time left, so I wonder if anybody has any questions about anything that I said, or clarifications, or... Yes?
So what happens?
The question is, if the intention was to have the same teacher for all those years, what happens when it doesn't happen? And the reality is that it doesn't always happen. And the hope is that the teachers who come in to take that person's place are people who also understand what Waldorf education is and can pick up where that person left off. It's not ideal, but I can honestly say some of the strongest classes I've ever seen graduate have been classes that have had more than one teacher. We've actually built it into our model here. Waldorf Shining Mountain is on the frontier of Waldorf education in having a middle school rotation. I think someone told me recently there's one other school that's doing this, but I haven't actually gotten confirmation of that. So we've already changed it somewhat. But the truth is that really I think the statistic is something around less than half of the time a teacher actually goes 1 through 8. And so the hope is, I guess that's a good point. I'll just address that in a slightly different way of saying people put a lot of emphasis on who the personality is in front of their children. And hopefully what I'm describing today, it's much more than that particular teacher and their personality. And so to some extent, who that teacher is not nearly as important as the culture of the school and the community around that school and that class. Our current 12th grade has had several class teachers in the lower school. It's a very strong class, really great people in that class. And you could say that what was presented to them in the changes that they had have been challenges that they've had to overcome. And, you know, good challenges make you stronger. Yes? Not bringing it, but the question is what's the role of music? How does that fit into this picture? And music, maybe I should ask some of our musicians to give a comment about that in the audience, but music is a different experience of learning than sitting in a classroom. And third grade, students begin with a violin, viola, or cello because they have to find that note. It's not given to them by pressing a button or a key, but they have to find the note. And it's something they sit in another group of students and play together and hopefully find the note together as they go along. That's kind of an external description of what it is. But more than that, there was an article just in the New York Times within the last couple of weeks about new discoveries about the value of music in education. And it really would be something of a different talk based on the arts specifically, but just to say it's another avenue toward experience of the world that is unique to Waldorf education, because we don't say, if you're good at this, do it. We say you're doing it whether you're good at it or not. We think this is a capacity that everyone needs. That's a very important principle of what we do. It's not by 6th grade you're only going to sit with other musicians who practice all the time. You're also going to sit with musicians who don't practice all the time. But when you hear what happens in our high school when they sit down and play together, when it is just people who are choosing that instrument, it's phenomenal. I think some of the highest moments I have are listening to my students, because I admire it so much, because I did not have the dedication or the well, I had the urging. My mother certainly wanted me to play the piano, but a couple of years was it for me. But it's just another element, and we could do a whole thing on how visual arts, how drawing and sculpture, and these are like fundamental aspects of the curriculum because different spiritual beings are behind them in a certain way. And when you practice them, you're drawing those beings into your life to influence you and take you out back into the world. So it's really, really important, and it's not a frill. So yes. Music, Shakespeare said, never trust anyone who doesn't have music in him because he's fit only for, and I forget the exact words, do we have any Shakespeare experts, but basically for robbery and things like that. And what he was pointing to actually was a reality. He was pointing to the development of the astral body. He was saying somebody who doesn't have any capacity for music has some problems in their astral body. And what is the astral body? It's the source of our speaking and our sense of truth. And Shakespeare was putting, I forget what the play was, but it was a joke about it's fit only for spoils and something else. But he was pointing to the fact that the music develops certain parts of your being that other things don't touch. Yeah. So the question here is, when the adolescents speak so forcefully, how does that fit into the picture of child development? I would join them in the discussion about the astral body and the consciousness that comes at puberty, because they're both related to it. Steiner describes the astral body as the body of sympathy and antipathy. And to some extent, in a simple way, it's I love this, I hate this, which is a constant polarity for adolescents. But it's much more than that, too. It's antipathy in a bigger sense of I am not that, I separate myself from that, and I need to do that to develop consciousness, because when I'm joined with you through sympathy and we're in the same place of loving something, it actually dulls my consciousness a little bit. You learn things through sympathy, but you learn other things through antipathy. And that's the nature of the astral body, the drawing toward things and the drawing away from things. And so with adolescents, young adolescents, they are, they're like babies in that world. And like I said, by the moment, I love this, I hate this, love this, hate this. And yet, as you see them go through high school, you see that starts to moderate a lot more. They start to find the middle path between those two, because they're actually much more comfortable in antipathy, which is the separation from things, to look at it and experience it and reflect on it, and to view it in an objective way. So that's really, we're working a lot with antipathy in high school. That's one of our big goals. Any other questions? So the question is, will a shorter period of the day of being exposed to the love in the kindergarten, will that actually diminish their experience or what they can draw from Waldorf education? Is that more or less what you're saying? Well, I'd say that I'm not an expert on the kindergarten, but I would say that having younger children in school is a fairly recent thing. And the idea of having children in school early is as much for the convenience of adults as it is anything that Rudolf Steiner recommended. I mean, he felt like the ideal world for a child would be home with their parents, playing in the garden and running in the woods. And it didn't depend on teaching or education at all. So I think that at that age, because of the nature of the child's experience, they're in a different place when they're in the class, but hopefully they're not in a different world when they're in the class. When they're in your care, they're also in the presence of a love which goes far beyond anything the teacher can bring them. And if they're in some in-between state where there are people who are caring for them who hopefully also embody these ideas, I don't think the shortening of the day or the matter of a few hours less, especially for a young child, really makes that much difference. They're just kind of stepping into the water at that stage of being out of the home and out of their mother's care. And I actually know many Waldorf teachers who do not put their children in kindergarten if they can avoid it until they're 6. So they're missing years of that love in a sense, but they're getting something else, which is probably more fundamental. Yes? Yeah, movement is essential in education, and we're going to have a conference here in February where one of the leaders in the study of movement, Angus Gordon, is going to be coming here to work with the teachers. He's the head of a number of schools in England. He started a school which was a crafts school for children who basically no one else wants anything to do with. These are like at their last stage of life. They go off to be with Angus Gordon for a couple years and become master glass blowers or something else. And again, the stories of how he's changed their lives are phenomenal. So the notion of sitting, life happens in movement. Once you become more than a plant, you are meant to be conscious and conscious in movement. So another big difference between a Waldorf school and other schools is we think that movement is really important. Eurythmy, which I think we could do a whole series on eurythmy treats the human being as an organ of speech and music, him or herself. When people say, what's different about a Waldorf school, I think you could do a whole talk on how eurythmy is primarily responsible for that. When I'm with high school students and we're doing a poem by Walt Whitman together in eurythmy, and the students are moving and their being is expressing these words that Whitman has created, it's a powerful experience. It's much different than looking at it on a page and reading it. And so the students have no idea, and that's fine. They don't need to have an idea of what eurythmy is because they're doing it. Although it's hard, I think it would be helpful, and we want to do more and more of explaining to them, why are you doing this? Now, you tell adolescents, they say, oh no, that's not what it's doing. And it doesn't always go where you want it to have that kind of argument with them. It's not an open-ended conversation, let's put it that way. But really, eurythmy is an extremely powerful tool just in terms of getting students to be aware of each other, to move together as a social tool, awareness of the space behind them, the space around them. It's a tremendously sophisticated tool in education, and it's amazing that there's no other school that uses it. And then sport, in terms of sport is a particular form of movement. It has rules attached to it. It has a very specific goal to it. I remember when I was a third grade teacher in New York, and third grade, you were finally allowed to play kickball. And so I'd played baseball myself. I loved baseball, and I thought, great, I finally get to play baseball with my students. And so the third graders, my class, we'd go out, and I was in charge. I was the pitcher, and I was the umpire and controlling everything. And the one group would go out into the field, and the kids up at bat would score like 25 runs. No one could catch the ball. The balls are flying all over the place. So the kids up at bat are just like, yay, this is the greatest moment of my life. And the kids in the field are all crying. And finally they get 3 outs, and it switches, and it switches. So now the ones who are crying are like, yay, we're the greatest team, we'll kill you, and all this. And the ones who are out in the field who are just having the greatest time are crying. So the question is, do you have to be a certain age to be able to really handle winning and losing? Do you have to be a certain age to handle your destiny being placed in the hands of other people? When your friend misses the big catch at the end of the game, do you hate him for it or make fun of him for a couple of weeks? Hopefully as children get older, they can handle this kind of thing better. I remember myself, my first experiences of playing Little League Baseball. I wasn't allowed to play until I was 10 in the town I was in, and that was a long wait for me. But I remember those first few years, 10, 11, 12, when I would strike out in a game, I would sit on the bench and cry, and my friends would make fun of me. And so I learned, don't cry anymore, Dave, until like 25 I could cry again, finally, after extinguishing that. But the other side of it is, the other side of sport, on the one thing, can they handle it, and is there enough adult supervision around to manage that in a healthy way? Who is coaching? If who is teaching is important. Who is coaching is every bit as important. Some people should not be coaching little people in sport because they're out there living out their own dreams instead of those of the children. Other people are very good at it, and they can make sport into a fun activity in which there's something beyond whether we win the game or not. But the other part of sport that is really important, I think, it's not so easy to see, is the training aspect. You know, when we do an art with someone, you don't say to them, do the same thing every day in the exact same way. When they're painting a picture, those two pictures will never be alike. In coaching, your goal is to make every time you do that exercise, you're doing it better, and you're refining a skill until it's exactly the same every time. That is great once you get to puberty. That's really good. You're working on something within yourself. Before that, you're actually hardening potentials that students have in a very specific direction that is meant to be at that time pretty loose. And so that's something that I think is kind of overlooked in the early sport thing. I know this is a battle that has essentially been lost. You know, the children are playing sports earlier and earlier, and to me, then it's just a question of who the coach is. But really, for people who are wondering, should I or shouldn't I with my child, you have to decide whether your child this is going to ruin his life to not be part of it with his friends, if all of his friends are doing it, or whether you feel like, it's not as big a deal, and I'd like to hold him back from that. The whole principle of holding back is so much lost in today's world, but it's really one of the fundamental ideas of what a Waldorf school is. You hold it back, and when it comes stronger. There was an article in the New York Times 20 years ago that they did a study that the earlier kids started Little League Baseball, the earlier they quit. They would generally be done with it by the time they were 12 or 13, and that was the end of it. And I think you could pretty much say that seems to be, that you can see that holds true for a lot of kids, that they have their time with it, they're done with it, and kids who really love it and want to stick with it do, but they would have done the same thing if they'd started later. So, yeah. Well, the first part of the question is what to do if a child falls out of love with a teacher, if love is so important. The second one is what at a certain stage or age, what happens when they fall out of love with the whole system of Waldorf education. So maybe this will be the last question because this is a big one. One of them is, the first part is, again, love is a much different thing than just I like this person all the time. You know, they're not going to like that person all the time, and they may go through long periods of time where they don't like that person at all. The key is if the teacher is doing their work and there's an attempt to, first of all, find out what's going on here, and if there's no clear answer to it and the teacher is not, you know, a bad person or a bad teacher or something, it may be an expression of your child's personality that's becoming who they are. You know, some people love to hate things. And I don't mean hatred, but I mean, you know, children and adolescents, it's really healthy for them to be able to express their dissatisfactions with things. It's the beginning of antipathy. I'm separating myself from this. And it's essential in the middle school that a teacher separates, or the students separate themselves from their teachers so they can begin to think for themselves. Because in the high school, it's not attached to the person at all. In the high school, we have specialists because now they're no longer learning because I trust this person. They're learning because they love this topic or they want to know about that. They're on the path to truth now, which is the adult view of things. So that's on the one hand. I think the love for a particular teacher, you know, I've taught many students, and there were some students I felt who never really liked me very much. Sometimes I would be surprised later, you know, that these students would act like they always loved me, you know, tremendously, and you just never know. And then the other happens too, you know, the students say things to your face, and they say other things to their parents. A lot of that has to do with the dynamic in the home that may not have so much to do with school at all. That's a whole other dynamic that goes, you know, the dynamic between people is sometimes expressed with one person saying they don't like things. Now, in terms of not liking Waldorf at all, again, a very healthy and understandable stage. It's really beautiful and surprising for me when 11th graders start to say, I'm starting to get it now. This is why it's so important that parents in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade don't say, which school do you want to go to? I mean, people do this routinely. You know, oh, I want to go to Boulder High. Why? Well, because there are more kids there. Well, okay. Do you know what you'll actually be doing there, you know, and what the philosophy of education is? Of course not. You have to ask them, what are the things that are making up this choice? Do you let your child decide whether they want to drive the car or not when they're in 7th grade? And so, do they have any conception of what they're giving up when they go to the other school? So, it's important that parents at that stage are just saying, I know what's best for you. I understand things that you don't understand. You try to help them to understand or to resolve problems that are there. But in the end, it doesn't really matter whether they like it that much, because I have rarely heard 8th graders say, I love this school. I don't want to go to any other school. Most of them have had no experience of another school. It's great to have a few kids in the class who have gone to other schools, because they go, you don't know how good you have it. And they tell the stories of, you know, how they had 4 hours of homework in 2nd grade and things like that. But generally, they're not talking about how much they love me or they love their teachers or anything like that. They're talking about things they don't like or things they like that we don't want them to like, you know, at that age. So, but again, the hope comes. 11th and 12th grade. I mean, our 12th graders last year, every year when I start senior seminar with the 12th graders, I say to them, what do you think about your Waldorf education? Are you glad you've been here over these years? I have to think really hard to think about whether I can remember any student ever saying, I wish I hadn't gone here, or even anything like that. And I don't ask them like that. We go around the room and they each speak about their experience. Oh, I came in 3rd grade, it was like this. But it always comes to the end of realizing, I realize I've been giving something very special. My parents have sacrificed to have me here. I often wish I had a microphone in the room, you know, because you can't reproduce those things for parents, but I hear it. You know, and I know it's no illusion that the kids are tremendously grateful, even when they say they hate it, for what you're doing for them. If you actually said to a lot of them, okay, we're going to send you to Boulder High now. What? I'm not going to that place. I mean, they actually know what's different about the schools, and there's much more wisdom in there than we think, or than what you hear from them. So I guess what I'm saying is, you know, as you remember from your own stage, a lot of things you believed when you were a teenager, you don't believe anymore, and you don't accept. And that's a great memory to have, to realize they're saying a lot of stuff. You want to help them to like what they're doing. And in fact, when I see them in school, I see that they like what they're doing. You know, it's like when I used to hear eurythmy, it was great. It was 6th or 7th grade. In my school in New York, the class teachers did eurythmy with the classes. And it was fun, you know, I liked it. And I knew they liked it. They liked having me there, which was part of it too, because they could see, we can do stuff that Mr. Blair can't do. You know, we're up there doing, you know, all this, and Mr. Blair is like, what do I do? You know, my brain was not formed in a Waldorf school. And so they would have great fun, and then they would go outside and somebody would go, I hate eurythmy. And they'd all go, yeah, I hate it too. You know, and it's like, and I'm thinking, what does that have to do with what just happened in that room? Nothing. It's just, this is what we're doing now. We're talking and agreeing about things. But whether it has something to do with what we were actually doing in that room, not much. And we can be grateful for that because they change, and they change for the better for the most part. And you can have tremendous confidence. We're in the process of doing a dress code now with the 12th graders. And this will be shocking to lower school parents if those of you that are here, because they know that they have a new plan down there. And it's perfectly consistent that in the lower school, you don't ask the students what you want to wear to school. you tell them what they're going to wear to school because it's very much a part of their learning environment. In the high school, it's a different thing. We're asking them to express their individuality, to follow their individual love for a subject and topic. So we've actually initiated conversations with the National Honor Society to say, we want you to propose for us a dress code. And the teachers will review it and think about it and see if we can live with that. And then we're going to ask you to enforce it in the high school. And the students are very into this. I had a conversation with the 12th graders about it yesterday. They were part of the discussion last year when it began. And they're basically, they say their first line of it is, dress should be modest, as if you were with your grandparents. Those are their words. Now, you wonder what follows, what kind of grandparents they have. But as far as I'm concerned, as a teacher in the classroom, I'm concerned if somebody is doing something distracting to other people, so they're attending to the girls sitting next to them rather than me, that's beyond the dress code. That is not okay. Most of what happens in our high school is nothing like that at all. It's way different than the lower school, but they live in a world that is much bigger now, and we want that to be true. We don't want them to feel like Waldorf means prison. It doesn't mean that at all. And so, it'll be a very interesting process to see what we get to and how we get to it. And the 12th graders are ready to go into the morning assembly with the entire high school and say, this is what the dress code is, and we're going to enforce it. Or as one of the, this will definitely be the last line because I shouldn't say this, but I have this drive to do this. My adolescent self, a great line one of the 12th grade boys said yesterday, because one of the fashions is to show your underwear. Thank goodness this is leaving. This isn't as bad as it used to be. And they're describing in geometric terms, well, it's the tangent of the drop of the pants over this and how they're going to describe what is not okay anymore. And as one of the boys put it, he said, just to make it simple, if we can see it, we're going to kick it. He was laughing, and his friends laughed when he said it, because that would not happen. Okay, thank you all for coming today. It's great to do this.